Good morning and welcome to the Minneapolis Institute of Art and the Friends Lecture Series. I'm so happy to see many of you here today to help kick off our new lecture season. My name is Barbara Proschel and I'm the president of the Friends of the Institute. Today we will hear our speakers, artist JoAnn Verburg and curator Liz Armstrong. And I hope that you will get a chance to visit Liz's exhibition entitled Aftershocks, and that's just down the way in the Harrison Photography Gallery. And now a word from our sponsor. This lecture is presented by the Friends of the Institute and made possible with generous support from the Mark and Mary Goff Bitterman Fund. If you'll note some of the upcoming Friends events on the screen, we have on the third Friday and Saturday of the month, we have a book club discussion and tour. And this month it's The Marriage of Opposites by Alice Hoffman. On the 9th, we're having an outing to the Midwest Art Conservation Center. And on the 17th, we're hosting a French wine tasting fundraiser. So this will be a wine class interspersed with travel vignettes and a preview of Mia's newest exhibition on the Toulouse-Lautrec at the Moulin Rouge. So it should be a lot of fun. And then don't miss our October 27th lecture at 2 p.m. And that will be with Professor Howard Lothan on Baroque art and the Charles Bridge statues. Also, we are bringing back our pre-lecture tours that will start an hour before the lecture. So that should start at 1 o'clock for that October lecture. If you are still not a Friends member, please join us. As you can see, we have a lot of fun events. And it's another way for you to support MIA, this institution that gives us so much opportunity. And now I'll introduce Liz Armstrong, who will then introduce JoAnn Verburg. Elizabeth Liz Armstrong is an independent art curator, writer, and art historian based in Palm Springs, California. From 2014 to 2018, she was director of the Palm Springs Art Museum. And Liz may be familiar to some of you because she was the curator of contemporary art here at MIA from 2009 to 2014. Prior to her MIA post, Liz served as curator of the Orange County Museum of Art, the San Diego Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Walker Art Center. Liz Armstrong is committed to innovative art and artists and has a long track record of acclaimed exhibitions, catalogs, art commissions, and special projects. Liz earned her Master of Arts degree in the history of art from the University of California, Berkeley. So please help me welcome Liz Armstrong and JoAnn Verburg to the stage.
No, thank you for that very nice introduction, and it is truly wonderful to be here, where I've spent much of my career and a city in which I've spent 2 careers. So I really am eager to talk to JoAnn about what happened and how we made this show come together. But first, I've been asked to introduce you. So hold on. I threw away all my notes, but then I remembered this. Okay. And also, you know, we could talk the whole time about JoAnn's career, so I'm just going to say a few things. It's becoming a veteran. It just, you know, it adds up. Needless to say, she has shown extensively here, abroad, in group shows, in solo shows. She's been involved in installations of public artworks, and also many projects in collaboration with artists from other disciplines. From 77 to 79, she served as the research director and photographer for the Rephotographic Survey Project, traveling through the American West to replicate the same wilderness views made by 19th century frontier photographers. Right there, I just think that would be so fun and interesting. After that, she headed Polaroid's Visiting Artist program in the late 70s, early 80s, where she promoted technical innovation in the photographic field by inviting artists such as Chuck Close, Andy Warhol, William Wegman, Jim Dine, among many others, to experiment with Polaroid's new large format instant cameras. She had a mid-career survey at MoMA in 2007, which traveled to the Walker Art Center. So many of you may have seen that in 2008. Her work is in the collection of many museums, including MoMA, MIA, Walker, LA County Museum, SF MoMA, ICP, et cetera. I could go on, but I wanted to turn to our dialogue. And I'm going to really turn a lot of this over to you, JoAnn, but just to get things going, I would give you just another little bit of personal biography. Like, why am I sitting up here? So last summer, and it was only last summer, I was asked if I would step in as guest curator for a one-person exhibition of JoAnn's work at MIA. And I'd known her work for some years. In fact, in 2012, when I was working here, we had a chance to work together in the context of a museum-wide exhibition at MIA about the nature of nature. And we included one of her newish videos, and the video so galvanized the galleries. It manifested the power of JoAnn's video work, and I eagerly said, yes, I'd like to work with JoAnn again. Now, JoAnn had already been working towards this exhibition with Casey Riley, who you all know, who first proposed the show several years ago. So when I came on board last summer, we started the conversation over in a way. And in my memory, and this is where I know JoAnn will soon jump in, we began our conversation with an overriding question that you had been pondering. And you sent me a poem by Jack Gilbert that helped me understand what you were thinking about. And it's short. It reads, "We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. We must admit there will be music despite everything." And it's just still so poignant, think of what's happened since 2012. But this idea of how you make music in this kind of time of devastating world change. Add to that the fact that JoAnn's work, at least to most of us, was known for its aesthetic qualities, its beauty. And so the question that she had in mind, I wrote that on another piece of paper. The overriding question was, what is our capacity for beauty in the midst of seemingly insurmountable challenges? And maybe capacity is the operative word. What does that even mean? But it's a question that we talked about throughout the organization of this show. And I would say that you had also discussed how profound the effect of 3 earthquakes had been on you in a few years previous, 2016 actually, that took place in Italy. And so JoAnn had these feelings of dread and loss, and they were enhanced by, just think about it, the global COVID pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, much closer to home, this resurgence of cultural and political extremism, and the distressing knowledge of climate change and its impact on the environment. And these were becoming sort of overwhelming, right? And I think many of us, you of course, but many of us began to wonder, was our work relevant? How were we going to move forward in what we're doing? I think it was a collective question, but then very specific to what you were doing. So what? No, that's not the question. So I wanted to somehow weave in personal biography because it's relevant to where your work's going. And unfortunately, I ripped up most of these notes. So you also moved to Minneapolis on a temporary basis back in when? Okay.
August of 81.
Okay. So this is where JoAnn's life took yet another turn. And I'm going to say when she met Jim Moore. And my question is, and I'll put up an image now.
Came for art, stayed for love.
You met Jim. How did this lead to Italy?
Okay, that's a question I can answer. Thank you for starting easy. When after Jim, what was it, about a year and a half of seeing each other, we decided we were getting married. And the question was where to go on a honeymoon. I was living in the home of Nigel Redden, who many of you will have known as the curator of performance and dance at the Walker Arts Center. His background was that he was hopping around with his family. His father was something like an attaché, and they lived all over. And I said, Nigel, where should we go on our honeymoon? And he said, Spoleto, Italy is the most beautiful place I've ever been. So based on that, at the end of we started out in England because we knew we could order food in English. And we kind of wandered around down toward Italy. And we had 10 days left over, went to Spoleto, and had been intending to go further south, but we said, no. We're going to have to not only stay here the rest of our honeymoon, we have to arrange our entire lives to get back here next summer. So we did that. And our friends were like, what do you mean you're going away? Well, and then we did it the next year. And then after that, it was just what we do. And after a while, we bought an apartment there. So, and we go back and forth, not just in the summer for a month, which was the original getaway. But it was so helpful for both of us to be in a place where we don't understand what the heck is going on, partly because of language. As artists, it is very provocative to not understand. And that I will give it back to you.
Well, to transition from there, and while we're looking at this image from 2020, reading into Pintoricchio.
Pintoricchio. He's one of our local Umbrian artists.
And the reason I wanted to start with this is that I could be an art historian for a minute and say the way an art historian might read this is that it's a diptych, which you find a lot in Italian museums, actually, religious art. And it suggests the split and perhaps the interconnectedness between nature and culture, the classic split. On the left, we have this tangle of olive branches, nature, juxtaposed on the right with a man reading a book, culture. So now you have, well, you haven't actually yet said, but that is Jim Moore, who has become, maybe from the beginning, one of JoAnn's muses in her artwork. You may have seen him in other works in the collection or elsewhere. And this particular work, you said, was inspired by an early Renaissance fresco of a chapel in Spoleto. Do you want to tell us anything about that?
Sure. I'm going to back up to the word diptych.
Okay.
Because one of my annoyances with photography all along is that it seems to tell a single truth. And I don't believe in a single truth. So just when I worked on the Rephotographic Survey project, those were all pairs because there was the 1974 version of an 1870, I'm getting the date wrong, 1877, I think that's right, version of the same place. We found the exact same camera location, framed it exactly the same. And by looking at two things instead of one, you realize that the first one, which was so powerful in its own contemporary world, that it was used to talk Congress into acquiring the Western territories all the way from the Mississippi to the California coast. That's how powerful photography was. We made the same picture 104 years later, not the same picture. And that putting one together with another was a breaking open of that idea of truth. The witness is true. And that became really seminal for me in all of my work after that. And I had to find other ways to say, this isn't the only truth. This is just what I think. You come to this and you have your own truth. You have your own history. You have your own vantage point, which I use that phrase to say where you're standing. But you also have your own viewpoint based on your history and your vantage point. And even one day to the next, or 1 month to the next, or 1 year, 1 decade to the next, you won't come to the same conclusion or the same open-ended questions about anything, your friend, your kids, your anything, but a photograph, a piece of art, and artwork. And that's what's so glorious about art, is that it doesn't only have one way to look at it. There's not one truth. So the diptych format was really appealing to me, and I saw it in Italy endlessly and ended up using that more and more and more in my own work. And I saw ways in Italy that things were varying. And also, actually, in this museum, the screens, the Japanese and Chinese and Korean, I think, screens that have scale changes from one panel to the next. Sometimes there's, as in the case here, nature, figure, home, mountain, it is a format that allows for a lot of different versions of reality. And that to me seems more true than just showing one magnificent, masterpiece. I don't believe in masterpieces. Also, I want to just shout out to dance, which I became really engaged with here in Minnesota when I moved here. I had never been before. And performance, especially by such experimental directors as Ping Chong, who contributed to the catalog and is actually one of the models in the exhibition. So that was mind-blowing for me, because it's not only a diptych, 2 versions of reality, but the whole hour you're sitting there, 10 minutes when you're sitting there watching something, it can go through so many realities. And where you're sitting in the audience is going to, et cetera. I could go on. So that I know I'm wandering way far away from the end of your what you were saying. I need a big darkroom timer. That
I know it's that. No, I mean, I expected this and hope for that. And you've also already reminded me, when you talk about diptychs, sorry, and that there's not one way of seeing them. I mean, this is a change in art history as well. At least when I trained back in the day, there was kind of a overriding interpretation of artworks and this realization or deeper understanding that we bring so much to the artwork that it's fine to impose that, I suppose, in a way, and read a work differently. And you also do that in the way, I was going to get to this later, but the way that you handle the camera, and we have a little video of JoAnn with her camera, because you need to see this way she works with a vintage camera. But part of what you see in almost all her images is that some parts of the image are in clear focus, some are out of focus as if they were in your peripheral vision, and then even further back they're in focus again, which is kind of mind-blowing, but also reminds us, that things are always changing. And I would say a photograph, well, you have to tell me because I'm not that technical, but photographs tend to capture everything looking alike, which isn't how we actually see the world. So
that's a great way to put it.
So I love,
and that's a problem for me too.
Yeah.
That was a problem for me with photography, that everything was homogeneous. I don't like homogeneity.
Well, I think you solved it in many ways, but with with the way you handle the camera, and we'll come back to that, because it is interesting to talk about your process. And we're almost there, but I want to say, while this image is still up, and where I was trying to go was how you and Jim started spending a lot of time in Italy, exploring old churches, historical buildings, the cathedrals. And I like to imagine the conversations you had. And I would just love to know, like, if it's a huge question, but how has that dialogue contributed to the evolution of your work?
Totally. But it's not different from my conversations with you, Liz, David Goldies, Cheryl Mosley, Ping Chong, my neighbors who are in a little row back there. Margie and John aren't neighbors exactly, but maybe someday, etc. And the people like Philip Byther, I think I see back there. And that's my way of, I don't know, of evolving, I guess, of becoming human differently, is talking. That's not everybody's way, but that's my way. I love it when people disagree with me, and in a, you know, in a spirit of kindness. It's the best. The human connection is the best. There's one more thing that you made me think of, Liz, as you so often do, make me think of things that I hadn't thought of. We talked a lot. I talked a lot with you when we were talking about the show and sort of what the meaning of things what the meanings are. I was talking about trying to break down boundaries. Well, here I've created a boundary. I could have done a panoramic picture here, but it does have to do with exactly what you were talking about. We look at the figure in the landscape. As the viewers, we look at the landscape, which you can kind of imagine without a figure because there isn't one in the left frame. But then there's this sense that they're together. So that's sort of a complex, a structure that allows for a complex kind of cat's cradles of different relationships, human nature. Having divided it, I also kept saying, I'm against these divisions of self and other, of human and nature, even if it's the viewer and the beloved nature, or the painter and the beloved nature. We are nature. We're not divided from nature. And that it feels to me, and I use the word urgency a lot when we were working on the show. It feels urgent that we get off our pedestal of thinking that we are something outside of and greater than and smarter than nature, because we're not. We're part of nature. And that is very central to my thinking. And a lot of these formal things, like when you talked about the focus, moving from what I think of, maybe one could look at, I don't always look at it this way, but one way to look at it would be the sharp parts are things you can take in and sort of understand. It's a branch, it's got leaves on it, yada, yada. And then the out of focus parts, who live very comfortably and simultaneously with the in focus parts, are things we don't know. So it's that knowing and not knowing that is, again, I don't want to divide those. That's our life as humans. We don't know everything. We're not supposed to know everything. We can't know everything. That's okay. That's actually good. But then we do know some things. And, so anyway, it's this division, but also this integration, the paradox of that. And I think as human beings, we have the capacity, to get back to that word, to do that.
Yes. Part of what makes us very human. So another thing I want to say, and I just put up Looking into Italy, another image in the show, by way of explanation, is when I started working on this with JoAnn, you were still questioning how to make these images, what would make this group of recent works, of which you had many but hadn't produced many, how would they hold together in an exhibition? What would be the cohesive force, let's say? And I think you'd already decided that all the work would date from 2016, when these 3 earthquakes rocked your world. And so I put up Looking into Italy because I'm also wondering, what are we looking at now with a triptych? I don't know, a few weeks ago, we were both watching the Kurosawa film Rashomon, and that idea that, there's one story, but 3 different ways of interpreting it or experiencing it by 3 different people. And so I think about that when I look at a triptych that you've made, but also when I look at this hillside in Spoleto, near Spoleto, I think of how you are trying to capture, if you are, the feeling of an earthquake, feeling of uncertainty.
Mhm.
There's a great quote, one of the authors quoted from Charles Darwin: "The trauma of a major earthquake is that it destroys our oldest associations. The earth, the very emblem of solidity, has moved beneath our feet like a thin crust over a fluid." That was written in 1839. Earthquakes haven't changed that much. It's exactly how you described it. Although I would mention also that JoAnn and Jim live in a 13th century sort of tower on an edge of a hill. So an earthquake was particularly distressing in that things were falling and buildings were crumbling. But so could you just talk a little bit about either your experience of the earthquakes, and if I'm looking at this image in a way that enhances it?
Yes, yes. The experience of the earthquake was pure terror. I was extremely scared. I kept thinking of those cartoons. Who's the character? It's like a cartoon character who goes running, 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 and then there'll be this big crack in the ground, and it opens. Roadrunner, and he falls in. At that. But then I thought, it's probably not gonna be like that. And then there would be another tremor, and it was like, oh no, is this gonna? Oh. I was really scared. We had to leave because I was just shaking all the time. We had to leave town and go outside of where the tremors were continuing. The aftershocks were just continuing all the time. And as Liz said, things are falling down, and you see the bank building with this giant crack that looked like the Roadrunner crack. And then there was the time I walked, we don't have a TV in Italy, but I walked into a bar where there was a TV, and it happened that I walked in at the moment they were showing some drone footage of the town on the other side of our hill crumbling to flattened. So it felt like it was a real possibility that we weren't going to last to the airplane in Rome. But that was an extreme version of something that has been of interest to me since even before I felt any physical danger from the earth itself. And that is that, and it comes from, I think the language of it for me, it comes from art, which is cubism, fauvism, Matisse, a lot of artists Chagall, who brilliantly use vertigo in their paintings. And my two favorite periods at that time, and probably still, I haven't really thought about that much in art, are when things go from the Renaissance, the pre-Renaissance, which is very abstract because they're really trying to talk about things we don't know, like God. And what does that mean? What does God mean? Well, we're not going to try to spell it out in this painting, but we're going to make it seem very mysterious. And then we have people who are trying to talk about what I call so-called reality, which are the cubists and the I'm combining two really unrelated. Sorry. It goes from the not describable to the describable in the Renaissance. So that would be Giotto. We did a Giotto honeymoon actually when we went through Europe. Who is finding ways to make people look three-dimensional, finding situations like St. Francis preaching to the animals. Again, there's this sense of we are all part of the same world, right? The animals and the people and the trees, we're all part of the same world. And then my other favorite period in art is the fauvism, cubism coming out of representational art. So it's that in between, that betwixt and between. And the way that the Cubists and Matisse and all those guys did it, Cezanne, was to make you feel like you could fall over. When you look at the picture, you could fall into Italy in this case. And so looking into Italy is two things. It's like looking into anything with your head. You do your research, or you're just interested. That's kind of this part. And then there's the looking in, the literal looking in, where you feel like into, whoa, you could fall into it. So it's, one could be a metaphor for the other. I don't mean for you to actually trip and fall and knock into the image, but it's in your imagination. Go right in. So a lot of that is influenced by the language of art. And then when I felt the earthquake, that, as I explained, was a kind of terror that I think is also related to thinking one thing, and then one day it turns out, Katie was saying it was less than a mile here to 38th in Chicago, that event where George Floyd was murdered. And we really didn't want to see that. We didn't want to think about that. We didn't want to feel the disgust and everything else, the horror of that event. So there are languages in art for dealing with things that go on in how complex, how paradoxical they are in life. And that's, I think, it may sound like I'm kind of going all over the place with this answer, but I think it's because life is incredibly complex, and there's joy and there's terror and sorrow, and they are all happening in this world all the time.
So you had spent time photographing olive trees 20, 30 years prior. And I mentioned it for a couple of reasons, but one is that I was surprised, but you explained to me that you'd spent so much time just trying to work out how to photograph the olive trees, speaking of complexity, and getting the technical details down. So one of my questions that I'll keep coming back to is, so what's changed when you go back to the olive groves after the earthquakes, after George Floyd, after all kinds of really scary political and cultural change that is just getting more and more extreme? How do you go back into the olive trees? And you've also used newspapers before in your work. I've just put up an American Man. I wish we could talk about the newspaper and how, in the context of this more recent work, it is a very important signifier.
Great question. Not that the others weren't. Okay, so the first part of it had to do with the olive trees. Yeah, it was at least 20 years ago when I was photographing olive trees, and there's a pretty simple answer to your question there. I thought, I don't want to say this too emphatically, but I really did not like landscape photography. And I didn't see it as relevant when you could actually go into the world, into nature yourself. Your body goes into a place that has the same kind of subject matter that Ansel Adams' picture of Yosemite has. I'd rather go to Yosemite. And I just didn't see the point of shrinking nature down into a flat, two-dimensional black and white version of itself. And it was the MAEP is such a gift to this community, and I hope everybody realizes that it's unique in the country. I had an opportunity to apply for an exhibition here at MIA, and I adored MIA from the day I moved here in 1981. I went right over to the photography department, and I've been doing it ever since. And the other departments. And I love coming here, and especially COVID. What a blessing to be able to walk around the museum then. Anyway, getting back to landscapes. I just thought that it was kind of impossible to make in photography something that would actually feel relevant and valid as an alternative experience to being in a landscape itself. And to do that, I wanted you to feel like you could actually step into a picture, or that you had been there and you just stepped out of the picture. And so some of the formal things that Liz has already mentioned were then what I started doing with these pictures of olive trees, including the multiple frame. The newspaper, did that cover that? So the newspaper, I started doing pictures. My husband very conveniently, starting on our honeymoon, where I wasn't so happy about it. I would be at my peak during the day, and I would get out my tripod and get out my big 5x7 camera and get out the film holders and my focusing cloth and my light meter. and I'd be all ready to go. And I liked doing portraits, not landscapes, certainly. And he would be asleep. So I'd wake him up and say, hey, I want to do a portrait. No. So I started doing pictures of him sleeping. And that was big. And then the other thing he would do is he'd read the paper. So during my peak period, I found myself either photographing him sleeping or reading the paper or a book or sleeping with the newspaper in the bed. So that was a very large part of my work. And when I started doing the, when I did the first round of olive trees, there were no newspapers. But when I was terrified in Italy, one of the places I escaped to was the olive orchards because, I was talking about the Roadrunner and that big crack in the, the cartoons. And I thought probably won't happen. And, if it does, it does. But the olive trees were only a little taller than I was. So it wasn't likely they were going to fall on me and I would be crushed underneath one of them. So I found myself one time I went just because I was scared and I wanted to go away from the city and all these buildings that were literally crumbling. And I felt myself calming down quite a bit. And I could feel a few of the tremors, but very few. There was a cushioning of the stones and the moss and stuff. And I thought, I don't want to do landscapes. I don't want to go back and I've already done olive trees. But I couldn't help myself. There was something about those trees that felt that I was just absolutely drawn to. And when that happens, I just go with it. But I knew I didn't want to do the same thing. So I thought about that and I thought, well, what I really want to do is something that has to do with the connection, the reciprocity between culture and nature. So how can I do that? And I thought, well, I know. I'll photograph olive trees here because I'm here. And then I'll go to another continent and I'll photograph olive trees in North America. And I'll photograph olive trees in Africa. And I found someone who knew people who could guide me around Africa and find olive trees. And that fell through because he died. But at the same time, I realized I wanted to go to Israel and photograph both in the Palestinian olive groves and the Jewish Israeli olive groves. So I did that, and that was really amazing. And the idea was either there would be a sense that you can't tell the difference from one culture to the next, or you can. And the reason it was even a question is because olive trees in Italy, which I knew very well, and I knew the people, they're like family members. Every generation is continuing what happened to dad, who's continuing what happened to grandpa, who's continuing what happened to great grandpa, and on where there aren't any names, they go way, way back. Everybody's very proud of their olive trees that are 2,000 years old or 1,500 years old. In every part of the world where they exist, people are very proud of them. And also, well, I don't want to get into how they first happened, but let's just say Athena was involved. And it was Athens. So anyway, so the newspapers were a way to bring what was happening outside of the frame into the frame. And I thought, the newspapers and any kind of cultural visibility, whatever showed that was maybe going to be different and maybe not from one continent to the next, those were ways of branching out. From just thinking about formally, how can I make a place that wants you to feel like you're part of it?
So to elaborate on that, this reciprocity you talked about between nature and culture, people and art, well, between art and life, is also was a dilemma for us curating the show. Like, your work has these newspapers in it, and if you really look closely. It's usually bad news, and you can read that. So they are reminders that the world is going on. The olive trees are surviving and enduring beautifully, and the world is falling apart. But I still felt that your work is so sort of resplendent and beautiful, and that how will visitors take this all in? So Mia very kindly agreed to let us, I don't know if you've seen the show, but there's a large trestle table, and we have some of JoAnn's previous books on it and some of Jim's poetry. But the most important thing, in some ways, is to have the news delivered every day. So there's a fresh newspaper up there. And also the invitation to sit and think and ponder, which is so much part of your work. But I felt really happy that we could use an installation to emphasize a sort of point.
Didn't we both have that idea?
I'm sure you had it first.
No, I think we both had it. Anyway. And can I just interrupt to say every newspaper that's in every photograph was that day, the paper from that day. And for some reason, I wanted to do a foreign paper. They're all the New York Times in its different iterations when it was connected with the Post. And then it was the International Herald Tribune. And then it was this, now it's just called the New York Times. But that felt really key to me, that whatever you're reading, and this is the only one where you can't actually read the text. You're reading a paper while he's reading a paper. That really appealed to me. That
So we have just, as I promised you, a little discussion of process. We have JoAnn working in some olive trees, I think in California.
yes. Well, the first that's Italy.
Oh,
and then we cut to California. Guess who shot the video? Is when I've been shooting multiple frame still images, and I've been finding that there's certain parts of the image that just look a little dead. So I've been coming over and getting these olive branches that have been trimmed and moving them into the dead earth and piling them up, and then coming around and looking in the back of the camera. So-called reality.
So yes, I was going to say, I never imagined curating an exhibition of your work. We were friends. We are friends. And that's not usually the best way to approach a show. So I had this experience with JoAnn in several places, photographing with you, trees and olive trees. And I actually, this show gave me the occasion to do some deeper dives into like the secret life of trees and all these great new books about our connection with trees. And so we've tried to embed some of that in the catalog. And I love the way you talk about it. What do we have next? Yeah, and just another moment to talk about process, but also JoAnn's technical virtuosity, let's say. I loved this photograph because the trees are so animated. I feel like they're little branchlets sort of reaching out to each other. It's sort of like unrequited love. And yet, and I'm sure we can't capture it that well in a slide, but the moment of dusk, the moment when color fades, day turns into evening, it's so captured in this photograph. So please go and look at it. And we also then use that color in the exhibition. There's some touches of color and one really big touch of color, which is sort of the sunset color. And I thought that was really fun to work with you on how we can allow the photographs to design the show for us.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because we have to say thank you, thank you, thank you to the people at Mia who worked on this show. Jill Bloomer was the one who picked the colors, the pinkest part of the sunset here. And we're going to see a video actually later of almost right now, of the making of this picture, which has you can see in different light, that you wouldn't know this from looking at this little video, but you can see in different light that the pink is either very, very pink and almost like orange, or it goes very in day, that's in tungsten light, which is like the lamps that we used to have in our houses. And then in daylight, you almost don't see the pink. It's almost completely blue. And Jill chose those two. It's that liminal moment in between day and night, which is dusk, dusk. And that that sense of paradox, or two things being one or one thing being two, that those you can tell by now, that really appeals to me. So thank you, Jill, and thank you all of the people who installed the show, and thank you to the wonderful people who worked on the catalog, who I adore and I'm just completely in debt to, and the administrative people as well. It's like this different layers of people, and the friends. Thank you to the friends. Should we give a big applause to the friends? Yay, friends. Friends has a lot of meanings these days, but this is my favorite. So this is a printer.
JoAnn does all of her own printing, which is
Except for one piece, because I didn't have long enough arms. And if Ethan Jones is here, he's the one I worked with for that.
but we should just say that's somewhat unusual these days. And she has these great printing presses in
This
her
is,
studio.
excuse me, Elizabeth, this is in another space with different light. Do you see how the color has really changed? So I print so that it works in both. If it doesn't work in daylight or tungsten, I go back and reprint.
I think they want us to move along. So let's just talk quickly about two of the video works in the exhibition. This is Daniela at the Headwaters. I really do want you to take a minute to talk about how special this place is. The images you make there feel sacred to me. And also they honor, as I think of it, some of your friends and who you brought, who posed for you. And of course, I don't have the video here, but when you'll see in the exhibition, there's this challenge that JoAnn sets herself to dissolve the boundaries between us and art. And these videos pretty much make that happen. So I want you to say a word about the Headwaters and what that place is for you.
The headwaters are water that is bubbling up from under the earth that started in the mountains around the headwaters, went all the way down into the core of the earth. This is according to your friend Russell. Is that his name? What's his name? Russell Lloyd? Something like that. Anyway, who had done some research, Russell Lord, about hot springs. And he said, because these are cold, the water here is cold, it was even older. And I thought, older? Water has an age? Okay. And he said, I think he said 3,000 years old. Maybe it was 5. It was so improbable that I can't even remember the number of years. But this is a place that has always, it's been protected, because it is a special place. When you go there, you feel it. Let's just say you feel it. It does feel like a sacred, whatever sacred means to you. It feels like that.
And you find, one finds watching this that, and I'll show you another one of these. It's so hard to look at the still images when I know they're moving, but they're moving so slightly that you know they're alive. But Daniela here is right on the edge of this fonte. You know, it's like you just feel like you could lie down with her and feel the space. The other one of these, there's several that are at the fonte. Hello. I wish we could count, really, this is, yeah, I'm sorry, but Mia needs to own this, but I've already told them that. Uh, but of all of the videos, this is the most ambitious, largest, and it is the most complex. So we have several chairs in front of it to encourage you to spend time with it. And I don't think we can go into the technical aspects of it or setting it up, but suffice it to say that you were there several different days.
6. Sorry, Jim.
And
This is the true test of love. I mean, he often says no when I ask him to post, but I didn't like the first version or the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth. And he did it again. I can't believe how wonderful you were.
beautiful. Well, this video, I had the opportunity to see it. We set it up in New York last year, which is when I learned that JoAnn's works don't really exist already. They're in the can or they're in the box or whatever they're in, but they don't just get born that way. You know, it's not just like you can take it out and print it. So the prints, the videos, they come, there's a birthing process that is so complex and you are so intensely involved in it, and it really makes a huge difference. All I can say is you've got to sit in front of this piece for a while if you want your blood pressure to go down, your heart rate to go down. And it's like well, someone said it's just like meditation.
And somebody else said I could get rid of my therapist.
That's true. That's so true.
I
So
just want to point out that this was not shot at the same time. Each one of these frames was shot sequentially. So I have one camera. It's a little it's not even fancy. It's a little prosumer, you know, in between pro and consumer version on a tripod. And I sketch it out in different, I do it differently for different videos, but I go 1 and then I move it over a little, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 6 different in sequence, 6 different videos that then get composited. And the sound is tip of the hat to John Cage and Merce Cunningham. Nothing in any of the videos is in sync. So the sound, you read it as though it's happening at the same time that you hear water and you're looking at water moving, etc. None of it is in sync, and it's not meant to be.
and it's a great relief to me that you can see Jim breathing. Because you know, there's so many great poems by Jim, but one that I always think of is how strange, or maybe you just said this to me, how strange that the subject of life is death. And you do write about that. And these images, and if we have 3 more minutes just to talk about what it means to be making work now at this point in your life. Sometimes they call it late career, but we can call it whatever we want. There's several of these. You saw Daniela, you see Jim. There's several other friends kind of Ping Chong, lying by the Fonte. And I'm not sure it's obvious that they're alive. Anyway, for me, I feel, and this is a compliment completely, that there's a sense of lamentation. You know, I mean, again, that's a religious theme, and a sense of.
I haven't thought about that. I like that.
Oh, thank you. I wrote it in my essay. No. I mean, I was grappling with, you know, what is that between life and death, and that, you know, do we prepare ourselves, and all these beautiful poems and songs that have been written about it. And again, you know, the heavy baggage of our time, you know, that all these things are on your mind of so many people, you know, suffering, you know, unimaginable suffering and despair. So I keep coming back to that and how you've managed and to find a capacity for beauty that brings us some solace or some way of being in a world that does have so many challenges and troubles. Now, I know they want us to save time for
May I
questions.
say something about death?
Yes.
Look at it this way. If you didn't know, if you were like an animal, I assume my dog, never knew what death was. If you didn't know that there was such a thing as death, why would life feel so incredibly precious? You know, I found something in an old journal from when I was in college that said, I hope when I get old, I'm not greedy for life. And I felt that way all the way through. I don't feel old. I never felt young. I just like, I'm alive. And death is something that defines the fact that we're here and we're present. And this moment where all of us are here, thank you for coming very much. We're all here experiencing our own versions of the same thing. And it's not going to last. And that's okay. So
Thank you for saying that. I want to end with going back to the challenges of doing a show and how one can creatively solve problems that seem insurmountable.
the day before the show.
And I'll just tell you that you all know the Harrison galleries. They're for photography, and yet the main wall is right across from all these windows. Light is pouring in. Any kind of work behind glass, which photographs generally are, is distracted with light and shadow.
You can't see it.
You can't see
You
it.
can't see the art.
And so this image we started with is what we always planned to have on the opening wall, but we forgot about the problem with the light. And so the wonderful team here, oops, and JoAnn's openness, we came up with this.
And it really circles back to Giotto for me, because when you walk into those churches, you think you know what you're looking at. You think you're looking at marble. Turns out it's all paint on plaster. And I always wanted to do something like that in photography, could never figure out how to do it. Voila.
So what happened? What happened?
So here's this wall. Big problem. What are we gonna do? Well, one possibility was put text on the wall. I could have sacrificed one of my images. It's an edition of 5. I wasn't willing to do that. I wanted kids to be able to run up to it and put their hands on it. And if it's glazed, if it has glass, that's okay, but not if it's not. And Jill Bloomer, the brilliant designer who designed the show, Lorraine Ferguson did the, look how it looks like a wall, Jill.
I know, isn't that, it is a wall. So that's just a little behind the scenes, but also really fun when you go up to the gallery and realize trompe l'oeil at its best. So I think that Barbara wanted us to leave a few minutes for questions. Do you still want us to do that? Is
there somebody with a mic?
Or I can repeat the question if somebody speaks loudly. Or there could just be, provocations, like what? I know you have questions. Hello. Yes, sir. The question is, what are your thoughts on film/photography versus digital?
It's unfortunately, there are 2 times when you have to make that decision. One is shooting and the other is printing. And I had problems with my lungs when I was in the darkroom, to the point that I was getting sick every single time I went in. So I had to switch over to digital, and I didn't want to. That I had a little in between with color photography, which was using an enlarger and all that. But it was so beautiful when I could use film and the backlighting of those early olive trees, one of which, by the way, is in reproduction above the cafe where you get your espresso. I hope you do. Anyway, the other problem is, printing. When my photos needed to be big, 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 I couldn't keep doing that with an enlarger. I needed to have them, I think in college, there were all these Marxist phrases running around like the workers should own the means of production. And I realized, I can't just send these out to a lab. I need to do it myself because I'm so particular about color. I change like every little inch of the picture is changed in a different way for me. That's not what most people do. So I needed to figure that out. And I got a Bush grant a million years ago, and I bought myself a printer and I ramped up to do that. I did a number of my public art projects. I transferred those into, because they were very large. I transferred those into digital. So I kind of slowly worked my way in. And then meanwhile, the quality was just going, it was getting so much better exponentially. So that seemed like, I think there's certain colors and certain things that digital just can't do. And I've adapted my vision. It took about a year. But I think digital and I are doing okay. I still use film to shoot this work, but not the video, obviously. So doing my best to adapt.
Other thoughts or questions? Yes.
We forgot to say that.
How do you determine the scale of your
That
prints?
is a quick answer. I want something in every image to be life size. So I know this when I'm shooting the picture, the 6-part video polyptych. I had a tape measure, and it was from Jim to the lens was 10 feet 7 inches or something like that. And I knew that at that distance, that camera, the video camera, would give me an image where for a 50-inch screen, I knew that was the size I wanted to use to show the work, that it would be, Jim would be life size, exactly. You can figure that stuff out in advance. So that's what I do. I figure it out. And then I know, if it's a photo, I can go bigger or smaller. I often ask Jim, would you please stand next to this image? And he's like a little further forward. And I say, no, you have to get way back, right by the wall, so I can see if the life size, if the print makes him look life size, etc.
Yeah, great question. How did we forget
Yeah.
about that? I really want to thank JoAnn. She had to produce all the work you see up there, with the exception, I think, of one print that was already produced.
I did it with him. We were there together, but I couldn't, imagine a 60-inch roll of paper, and my arm span is probably about 60 inches. And if I lift it up, I couldn't do it. But he has really long arms.
Okay, thank you, Ethan. JoAnn, really, it's been a fantastic experience for me, eye-opening in many ways to work with you. I really recommend going up to the galleries and spending time with the work, because I like to lower my blood pressure whenever possible. I want to thank Mia for enabling us to produce an amazing book with several wonderful authors writing for it, and some of Jim's poetry, and every work in the show is in the catalog. Please. That's not always possible in a year. So it really was a fantastic effort on everyone's part to make that happen. You have great support here. You're part of it. We really, really appreciate it. And what are you looking for, JoAnn? Designed by Lorraine Ferguson Weinberg. If anybody remembers, she was the designer at the Walker back in the day, 80s, 90s. Adam Weinberg's wife, if you followed the Whitney, fantastic designer. And what she understood about life size and the importance of life size imagery to JoAnn's work, she embedded in the catalog. So that's why you.
This is where this part of this image is life size. Thank you, Liz. I just feel so incredibly lucky that this institution gave me the privilege of doing an exhibition. And there's no one I would rather have worked with. It's just been an absolutely stimulating. I learned so much from you and fun experience. And I want to say one more thing, which is I used to say before Liz helped me figure out how to talk about this work, because I really don't work that way. I'm not like, oh, I know what I'm doing. Here it is. I used to say, people would say, what's the work about? And it's still true for you. It's about you. Without the viewer being in the presence of the work, it's meaningless. And it just means so much to me that people are looking, and that in this moment in history where we're troubled and we have great advantages, we have joy and we have sorrow, that people are willing to come over to the museum and subject yourself or to engage art of all kinds, of all stripes. And thank you very much for being people who love art and who are like it or are willing to look at it. And yeah, thank you very much.